Chapter 19. Looking for Jake and Ken. Ron Carter and Winters left through the back hatch of the habitat with hopes that they would avoid detection and achieve their objective to locate Team N. The shield was still down when they left the loading bay location where the habitat was deposited, and being the news hound, followed her instincts and went for the same door that led to the control room where the Colonel and Sergeant Manning had surprised the guards and shut down the shield. The guards were still in the interrogation room with their hands full subduing Colonel and Sergeant Manning. Anne put her ear on the door and could hear the shouting and grunting of the Sarge. She signaled to Ron and the two of them beat a hasty retreat. Ron and Anne hid behind crates in the loading bay and followed the procession of guards leading Team A into the vehicle which would send them on their way to the Great Chamber of High Priests. As the robotic arms were loading cargo into rear hatch, Ron and Anne waited for a quiet moment when the robotic arms retracted to retrieve other boxes and crates and climbed into the cargo compartment. Anne whispered to Ron, "We will be trapped in here if we cannot open the hatch from inside." Ron took out his Swiss Army knife and tried to jimmy the locking mechanism from inside. "Oh no, this is an electronic lock, and my Swiss Army knife won't work. But I have this multi-frequency detector emitter which should be able to unscramble the unlocking frequency." "And so can you hack the lock system from inside?" "Ron, yes, I think I can open it from inside." "We're okay." They closed the lid gingerly, leaving a crack to watch the door for activity. The group comprising of the humans and guarded by the Helicians came out and entered the vehicle. They boarded the vehicle and proceeded to the Grand Council building. On arrival at the Grand Chamber of High Priests, Ron waited for a few minutes before he jimmied the rear cargo hatch and he peeped out. There were too many guards patrolling around for them to emerge from the vehicle. And waited impatiently and could not wait for the chance to follow them into the Great Chamber. "And, Ron, we should be in there." "Ron, quiet now, the guards are near to this vehicle, we cannot make a move, or we will be caught." So, they lay low and kept a watch through the rear hatch, and before long the doors of the Great Hall of the High Priests opened. After what seemed like an eternity, they observed the Helicians escorting the humans out of the Grand Council Assembly building. Zachary came forward and then led the way forward to the vehicle and shoved the Colonel and the Sergeant into the back seats with guards on either side of them. The Professor and Ken were accorded slightly better treatment as they were at least shown to their seats in the middle row. Zuriel came rushing out of the Grand Chamber, and when Zachary was not looking, he bent over and whispered to Ken Harding, "I will visit you and talk to you about your ideas using nuclear technology you say can save our star." Two guards forced their way in between the two of them and blocked them from any further dialogue. Zachary tapped Zuriel on the shoulder. "Zuriel, if I may remind you, the Council of High Priests have already ruled that there will be no more communications with the visitors." With all of Team A on board, the vehicle pulled away from the landing platform and joined the magnetic drive highway and headed for the detention center. In the rear cargo compartment, Ron activated the two-way homing beacon to try to locate Jake. For a few seconds the position indicator blinked and steadied into a steady pattern without any detection signs. He pointed it out to Anne to show here the device was working, and that homing on Jake's signal was still a possibility. As the vehicle approached the detention center, Sergeant Manning noticed something and made him give a look at the Colonel. Colonel Owens nodded his head towards the front of the vehicle. In the near distance was the loading base dimensional gate building where the team knew the habitat was still at. Ken and the Professor caught the nod and the sight of the building. And when the indicator on his device started to flash and the proximity indicator began to register a reading, Ron could barely keep his excitement to himself. Anne bent over and he showed it to her and inadvertently pushed against the open panel in the middle half of the back seat of the vehicle. The Colonel and Sergeant Manning were surprised to see Anne's face through the open panel. Ron quickly pulled her back and the Colonel elbowed shut the panel just in time so that the guards would not notice, and indeed after a few moments they did not still raise the alarm. The vehicle parked at the basement of the detention center and the guards brought them into the elevator and to the reception center on the second level. Zachary addressed them in a group. "Zekan, representing the entire Science Council, appealed to the High Priest on your behalf. Their combined weight of opinion made a difference. You are to be accorded our courtesy and support as our guests. But I do not have to remind you that any unacceptable behavior or attempts to escape will immediately forfeit you this special treatment. Do I make myself clear?" Just in case my words are not heeded, there are guards outside your doors and all the access doors and elevators. As for you and you, pointing to the colonel and sergeant, you will be locked in your rooms just in case both of you do not follow instructions. Is that clear? The light from the star Helios began to fade as it sank below the horizon of Helio. The twin moons of Helio shone prominently. It was a beautiful sight never seen on Earth, with a half moon and a full moon in the night sky at the same time. The colonel and Sarge had no time to admire the night scene. Each of them examined their room for any weakness. After a few futile attempts, the colonel and the Sarge stopped trying to kick down their room doors. The guards began to relax and settle down into their routines. The loading bay emptied of workers and the robots became idle, and Ron peeked out from the rear cargo bay of the vehicle. The coast was clear, and they climbed out and took cover behind some crates. Ron was so excited that his device was blinking, showing Jake was near, and most likely in the building. And who had done some undercover work for the network grabbed his hand to get his attention. Ron, we watch for the elevator, and when someone comes out, we stick something to prevent the doors from closing, and we get into the elevator. After a few minutes, with a piece of packing material, Ron managed exactly that. Seeing the hesitation in Ron, she said, "Do you want to see Jake or not?" Didn't the signal showed him to be in the building? She pushed Ron into the elevator, and when its doors opened automatically on reaching the second floor, they got on their hands and knees and crawled out. It was just their luck that the guard at the reception desk was on shift break and was not watching the security cameras. They had managed to avoid the guard so far, but when they peeped around the corner, they spotted the guards outside two of the doors on that floor. Ron said to Anne, "I am guessing that they could be in those rooms, but just how do we get them out safely without raising the alarm?" Anne and Ron looked around and both focused on the same device on the nearby wall panel. A button with what looks like a fire symbol. This was universal language that does not require any translation, the fire alarm. Both pointed to that and looked at each other with the exact same thought, why not set off the fire alarm as a decoy? Ron, is that what I think it is? And, hello there, what do you think this flame-like symbol is doing on this yellow push button on the wall just over there? Ron crawled over and raised his hand to push the yellow button. Shrill high-frequency sounds could be heard all over the building. The two guards called on their handheld communication set to someone or somewhere. Following that, they took out their key device and opened the one of the doors. Sergeant Manning burst out of the unlocked door and in a few seconds flat, disabled the two guards. Sergeant Manning then took their key and freed Ken and the Professor Ron and got up from their hiding place and joined them. Professor Anatoly looked around the group and asked, "Where is the Colonel?" They could hear the Colonel trying to bash down his door and picked up the key device the guards had used to open the first door. Colonel Owens came out of his room like a caged tiger that had just been freed. "Colonel Owens, Ron, and thanks for rescuing us. Is the habitat safe?" Ken reached for Anne's hand and pulled her into his arms and gave her a big hug. After the excitement of the rescue, the Colonel said, "Let's get back to the habitat and blow this whole damn place to the dark ages." Ron, hey, I still need to find Jake. Just at that time, his device started to blink rapidly. "Dad!" And when Ron turned, Jake ran up to his dad and hugged him. The Colonel waited for a few seconds of reunion to continue. He then turned his attention to the teenage Helician female standing close to Jake. Needless to say, everyone was just staring at her. Anne was the first one to react by walking up to Zilia and putting her hand around her shoulder. "Hello, you must be Jake's friend." "I am Anne Waterston, just call me Anne, and what is your name?" Jake broke out of his hug with Ron and said, "She is my friend and she rescued me." "Zilia, I am Zilia, and Jake, and I took the transport vehicle my father arranged to bring us to the loading bay. But somehow the vehicle stopped in the basement of this building instead. Jake, her father is Zuriel, the senior research scientist on the Dimensional Gate program. Colonel Owens, good we keep her with us, she might come in useful later." And came in between Zilia and the Colonel. "Colonel Owen, I hope you are not planning to do what I think you may be thinking of." "Ken, Colonel Owen," Zilia helped Jake. "We must not take advantage of her being with our group." Colonel, Miss Waters-Tun, what do you take me for? And Dr. Harding, I reject your insinuations. It is just that with Zilia in our company, we will all be able to talk some sense with the adult Helicians we have been dealing with. And took Zilia's hands and pulled her to her side, just to keep Zilia from the Colonel and Sarge. With that, the Colonel assumed command of the entire group. They searched the 2 guards, bound, and gagged them. They took their weapons and communication devices. In a single file, they headed down the emergency exit and stairs down back to where their vehicle was parked. In the confusion, they only met 2 or 3 guards which Sarge and Colonel had no trouble disposing of. The communications device came to life and Zachary's voice came through. "Hello, this is Zachary. What is going on there at the center?" Sergeant Manning looked at the Colonel and with one hand signal from the Colonel, he cut off the device power. Then another device came alive with a voice that they could immediately recognize as Zuriel's. They looked around and saw Zilia holding on to the communications device from which the sound emanating from. "Zuriel, hello, Zilia, where are you now?" "Oh, you are at the detention center. The fire alarm has gone off there, right? Make sure we get our visitors to safety. They have much valuable information for us and must be protected." The Colonel signaled to Sarge to kill the power to this communications device too, but Ken grabbed it before he could do that. "Ken, Zuriel, this is Ken, we are safe, but we need your help to stop this crazy nonsense happening to my world. You are the only one that we can talk to. Please help us." "Zuriel, Ken, help me then. My daughter and the young man from your planet must be in your building when the security alert cancelled my programming on the vehicle bringing them to the loading bay." There was a momentary period of silence. Jake took the communications device and handed it over to Zilia. Zilia investigated the communications device and spoke to Zuriel. "Father, this is Zilia. The vehicle stopped at this building and Jake and I hid until Jake's father and the other human showed up." "Zuriel, thank goodness, you are safe, Zilia. Now give the communications device back to Ken." "Ken, when you and the professor say you can help us, what did you mean?" The professor came up to join Ken and spoke into the communicator. "Zuriel, you and Zevon and those on the Council of Science must realize that without a solution to the decreasing hydrogen H1 in your star's core, all attempts to feed your star will not succeed. Ken, if your mass seeding of your star is successful, you should record a reduction of the mantle, in contrast to its continuous expansion due to the depletion of H1 and burning of helium." There was silence again for a moment on the communicator. Then Zuriel's voice came through. "I have checked our measurements of the mantle and it is still increasing. That confirms what I was afraid of, that my superior Zekan star mass seeding program is not working or maybe has not ever worked. All right, I agree to help you on the condition you share with me all that you know." "Agreed." Professor Anatoly and Ken looked at the Colonel, who nodded his consent. Ken agreed. "So how do we escape from this detention center?" "Zuriel, all of you quickly board the same vehicle that brought you to the center and look for this symbol on the dashboard. Activate it by pushing the button marked. I will program the vehicle to come to a remote location where I have a private laboratory where we can meet." Colonel Owens led the whole team into the vehicle, and they did as they were told by Zuriel. The vehicle automatically lifted itself into the magnetic drive highway and proceeded to travel away from the detention center. After a considerable period and distance, the vehicle paused in front of a gated compound. The main gate slid aside, and the vehicle glided off the magnetic track and hovered into the compound and settled down at the back of a building. As the Colonel and Sarge stepped out of the vehicle with their weapons drawn and primed, they heard a voice speaking out of the back of the building. Suddenly a light came on and they could recognize Zuriel sticking his face out of a doorway. Zilia ran up to Zuriel and he hugged her hard. He looked up and said to the humans, "Coming quickly, and then I have to send the vehicle on its way after erasing its journey log and disabling its tracking device." The whole team stepped into the building while Zuriel busied himself at the console of the vehicle. Sergeant Manning stood by his side watching him through the whole process until the vehicle rose and glided out of the compound and joined the magnetic highway and disappeared into the distance. When Zuriel stepped back into the building, the Colonel confronted him. "How do we know they won't follow the vehicle to this location?" "Zuriel, I have manually programmed this vehicle's control unit to send it to a faraway location and shut down the positioning tracking device by overriding it. But there is a time limit, and beyond that it will by default reset itself and the authorities will be able to track it. They have a way to query its journey log and eventually track us to this location. But for the moment until that happens you are safe.